So I've decided to make a video refuting God. Obviously I can't upload it on my real channel because the backlash I would get from triggered people who don't know how to substantiate an argument, and basically saying that what I'm saying is wrong. There's no proof that he doesn't exist, so therefore he exists. Now, obviously, I'm here to prove them wrong and to find out if God is logically impossible or whatever. So let's get started. And before I start, I don't hate Christians or people who are religious at all. Personally, I just don't believe in Christianity or any sort of God, even though there is a possibility of it happening. However, the Christian God is impossible. So let's get started. My first point is the idea of omnipotence, or omnipotence, depending on where you're from. Omnipotence is a trait given to God, which he says himself that he's omnipotent, which means he's all-powerful, right? He can do anything, he can make anything, he can fix anything, you know. Now, this can be logically possible. For example, a circle is logically impossible. There's no way of making a square circle in logic. And if you disagree with me, please go ahead and draw a circle with 4 90-degree angles. The idea of omnipotence is like a paradox. And a paradox is, well, let me look this up actually, I can't remember. So, a paradox is a statement that despite apparently valid reasoning from true premises leads to an apparently self-contradictory or illogical conclusion. So, yeah, that's what it says on Wikipedia. So, here's a question. Can God make a stone so heavy even he can't lift it? Now you might say, of course, God can make a stone so heavy even he can't lift it because he is all powerful, right? But in that case, he's not omnipotent because he can't lift the stone. If he can't make the stone in the first place, he's not omnipotent because he can't make the stone. And the idea of, well, the first defense that Christians have is that omnibenevolence and omnipotence is like Christians have got free will. No, everyone's got free will, which is the argument saying if we have free will, there's going to be suffering, etc. If God was all loving, he'd want to help us. If God was all powerful, he'd be able to help us. So that means that God is either not all loving or he's not all powerful. And obviously, since all-powerful is a myth, he can't be all-powerful because of paradoxes, etc., you'd come to the conclusion that he's all-loving, right? However, there's been countless points in the Bible where God has not been all-loving. He's killed people before. He's flooded the earth. You see, stuff like that. He even burned a city that, of course, was full of a lot of hatred, etc. But I don't think that the children in that city that he burnt down were guilty of anything, or innocent babies. The fact is that God's killed more people in the entire world than any kind of political leader, you know, even Hitler, even Stalin, any of these big political figures or any people who've committed mass genocide haven't gone close to what God has done in the Bible. And it's not like he tries to hide it instead, because he actually puts it in the Bible. A lot of people might say, or a lot of Christians might say that, yeah, it's just a teaching, okay? And we don't, agree with that. However, if you really wanted to follow a religion, wouldn't you follow it to the best of your ability? Why would you follow a religion half-heartedly and pick out parts that you agree with? And if you don't agree with some of God's teachings, why are you a Christian? Or why are you Muslim, or why are you Jewish, or it can go on. So, why would God love you, but then send you to hell for not knowing about him or not agreeing with what he says? That sounds like tyrannical to me. See, if God punishes you infinitely for some finite crime, say you swore, okay, you said God's name in vain, okay, you said, oh my God, if you say that once, if you sin and do that once, you're going to hell, okay? Which is an eternal suffering. Does do people really deserve infinite punishment for finite crimes such as that? And if you really love the idea of celebrating in heaven while you know yourself that there are people down there who are infinitely suffering because they didn't agree with you, that is messed up. And of course there's the idea of omniscience, okay? So omniscience is where you know everything. If God knows everything, he knows the past, the present, and the future. If he knows the past, obviously we know the past. We're knowing the present right now as I'm talking. But in the future, if God sent us to this earth to judge us or whatever he does, he says he's going to judge us after we die and what we do in this earth right now. But if he knows the future, what is the point of life? There is no point. And every Christian I've asked, they've never given me a good response. They've avoided the question or just said, be grateful God even gave you a life. Like, come on. And what about people who have never heard of Christianity or never heard of God? Because you're still going to hell if you haven't heard of God. Because you're not a Christian. Or Muslim or whatever. I'm just going to say Christian because the Christian God is the Abrahamic God, which is essentially the Christian, Islam and Jewish God. So if there's no point in life, here's an idea. So if God knows the future, God knows that, say, choice C in the future is the choice you're going to make. Well, claims to make freely, quotes freely. But it's now necessary that choice C will be the choice you'll make, because God already knows, and it's predetermined if God knows the future. But it's necessary that C can't be anything else. So there are no actual possibilities because they're predetermined. They're all predestination or whatever you want to call it. And if you can't do anything else, you don't act freely, which is the principle of alternate possibilities. Therefore, when you act, you can't do it freely, if there's a God. Here's a quote I heard recently, which I somewhat agree with, but whatever. It says, yet they devote their lives to it, almost like they are scared of things they don't understand, so they follow a story that is most likely fake with obvious contradictions and paradoxes to convince themselves that they are special, and there really is a place after death, and ridicule anyone who doesn't follow their own religion, and liking that the idea of their predetermined fate will allow them to live happy in heaven while other people who are also predestined to rot in hell, even though humans are meant to be treated equal. How messed up is that? Jesus Christ. Well, I get it. Because Jesus Christ, yeah. Going back to the omnibenevolence, if you agree that everything that God does is good, then you also agree that killing people, enslaving people, raping people is good by definition. Why? Can someone please explain that? So do you think it's okay to kind of stone to death disobedient children like it says in this Bible quote? If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that, when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him unto the elders of his city, and undo the gates of his place, and they shall say unto the elders of his city, this is our son, is stubborn and rebellious, he will not obey your voice, he is a glutton and a drunkard, and all the men in the city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear, which is Deuteronomy 21, 18-21, King James Version. Sorry if I can't read that very well, but... And do you think we should kill people for doing yard work on Sunday as commanded in Exodus 31:15, where it says 6 days may work be done, but in the seventh, in the Sabbath of rest, holy to the Lord. Whatsoever doeth any work in the Sabbath day, he shall surely be put to death. Which does bring me to the point of God resting. If God was really all powerful, why would he need to rest? Even if it is a metaphor, that's a convenient little switch to say that, oh, God's just making a story here, he's not being real. But why would the true word of God be? Why would he want his true word to be flipped into a story just because you don't conveniently just don't agree with what he says? And if you disagree with the quotes I said before, then you're implying your own standard of morality and disagreeing with God, which is, send you to hell, And don't give the excuse of, that was the Old Testament, Christians go by the New Testament. But why would God change his opinion? If God is this one all-loving being, he wouldn't change his opinion, because that means he's not all-loving. You're very willing to cherry pick the Old Testament when it so suits you, but as soon as you disagree with it, it's not okay anymore. Or point out the inconvenient parts. You're just like, oh, it's the Old Testament, whatever, it doesn't matter. Because you believe in the 10 Commandments, don't you? The 10 things that every Christian has to follow. Yeah, that was in the Old Testament. So if the Old Testament doesn't matter, you shouldn't be a Christian. You're not following the 10 Commandments. And, that's about all I can think of for the argument. I mean, if you disagree with me, well, you're fine to disagree with me. You can certainly say it. But I have my opinion. You have your own opinion. Maybe you're not a bad person if you're a Christian. I know a few good Christians, but it's just the idea of, Catholicism or whatever that people tend to follow. And, the kind of stupid stuff that some people do. I'm not saying my view is necessarily the best view it is, because I'm pretty sure it's fluctuated. First I was a Christian until I was about 9, and then I just became an atheist, and now I'm kind of on the fence, agnostic. But I'm not going to be a Christian, but I don't necessarily agree with the idea of atheism, because if you can't prove that God does exist, you can't prove he doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean he exists, which is the argument from ignorance fallacy. If I said, you can't prove God exists, and then you said, you can't prove God doesn't exist, or if you reversed that and said, there's no proof unicorns exist, so they must exist, it doesn't make any sense. Here's a quote to sum it up. Tell people that there's an invisible man in the sky that created the universe, and the vast majority will believe you. Tell them the paint is wet, and they'll have to touch it to make sure. So yeah, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, whatever, subscribe, I don't really care. But it's just my opinion. If I get any hate thingies, or whatever, just remember that Christians are meant to forgive and forget, which is what Jesus taught. And I will forgive and forget you, without having someone tell me I have to. See you in the next video. Don't know when it's coming out, but whatever. See ya.